Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to The Ways We Move, the podcast where we cover everything within the mobility world, within the transportation world, everything that is new, and also the people moving that revolution of sorts behind us. My name is Nicholas Zard, and I am your host on today's show again. And today I'm very excited because I've invited someone I've gotten to know over the last 2 years, and also someone who I feel is part of our little group of friends within this industry, someone I deeply value and respect for his point of view. I've heard him speak for the last 2 years, and I was always struck by how down to earth Curtis is. He's one of those refreshing voices in the industry that's not only about the dreaming part of this new industry. So check out their website. It's Modalis.ca. They are in Canada, but they are all over the world, and it's a user experience consulting group, mostly around airports. They have a lot of experience. They've done a lot of interesting programs and work with a few international airports around this world. So without further ado, we'll let Curtis tell us a little bit about himself, his company, and also we're going to have a very rational look at what we call AAM, or Advanced Air Mobility. What is going on in this world and what is happening? So stay tuned for more. Well, Curtis, please introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us about who you are.
Nicholas, thank you. My name is Curtis Grad. I'm the founding partner of Modalis Infrastructure Partners, Inc. We're based out of Vancouver. And I guess we're operating into our 12th year. Our focus has really been on airport private sector development and operation. And my personal background comes from that sort of line of business. And over the last 12 years, we've basically been building up a lot of expertise and experience in that space. But as we see with advanced air mobility, it's still in its infancy stage, but it will eventually be an asset class onto itself. And we would like to be applying what we've learned in the airport space to the vertiport space in the future.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because that's the interesting part, is that you're one of those very rare companies that are actually in the conventional aerospace industry, but at the same time, you're also embracing the future, hence advanced air mobility. So tell us more about what you've done in the past, and then we'll lead into how or why you're just went in this direction too.
Sure. Well, our first entry into the advanced air mobility space was supporting Ferrovial when they first started up their
Right.
U.S. operations in Florida, right? And this is back in early 2021 when people were talking about it, but it wasn't really in the public consciousness yet. And when they approached us, they said, "Look, we're setting up this new venture in Florida, and we're looking for the right people to help us launch." And so our job was to help them find the right person to launch that work, and effectively that expert worked through us as a expert resource to help them launch the project in Florida. Now, lots of water under the bridge since then, and as we know, they're going through a divestiture process that basically assigns their IP over to to a new U.S. based
Right.
owner. So that's where we started in the advanced air mobility space, but it was really applying the experience that we had in airports. And I think you and I talked about this in Lisbon when we met for the conference, but some of the awkward conversations are around, how do you make it economically viable? That you've got infrastructure that requires investment, and you're trying to spread that over 4 passengers at a time in an aircraft. So it really comes down to the fundamentals of figuring out what the infrastructure requirements are and how to build a business case around it.
Yeah, I think you said it really well, and this is also one of the reasons why early on we also started to look at eSTOLs and eCTOLs as being extremely important for a few reasons. Well, obviously, it's easier to make money off of a 9-passenger aircraft than it is for a 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Mhm.
And also because we want to play with everything. I want regular airplanes to land and take off, and I want helicopters to do that, and
Mhm.
of course eVTOLs when they. But mostly also because commercial certification, which nobody seems to talk that much about, really will happen
Mhm.
first with
Mhm.
fuselage, empennage, and wings before we get to eVTOLs. Most likely, right? I'm not
Mhm.
saying, prove me wrong, I'd be happy. But so this is one of the things that I wanted to say, that you're one of those rare companies out there. Actually, you're not the majority, but you're one of those rare companies out there that has that traditional background in
Mhm.
aviation, and you're more likely able to probably better implement it into the future. Do you
Yeah.
see any kind of segues that you can use from the conventional airspace to bring into what we now call advanced air mobility?
Well, in conventional airports, you always start with a planning
Hmm.
concept of what is your design aircraft. So, we may have a smaller airport that may only have regional jet traffic, say a CRJ aircraft, but the aircraft design, or the design aircraft, may be a 737-800 or a Max, for
Right.
example. So that way you can continue to grow, and it means the runway's long enough, but the runway width also has to be appropriate and what have you. Um, One of the difficulties I have with the planning that's going around advanced air mobility and vertiports is, if you're planning a vertiport in an urban area for an aircraft that holds four people and a pilot, and the FATO is a fixed dimension,
Yeah.
as that aircraft starts to expand and be more capable of a commercially sound business case, whether it's 9, 12, 15 passengers, it means the FATO gets bigger because the payload gets bigger. And whether it's, there's a lot of different designs out there, but they all typically rotate around a very condensed cabin. But as you start to build
Mm.
higher capacity airplanes, if you're really building it strictly based on a FATO, FATO and fatal will sound a lot similar in terms of a fatal business case. Some of the ideas of getting stall aircraft involved makes a lot more sense. But if you're going to plan out a vertiport in an urban area, you better make sure that you're planning it out for larger aircraft and bigger FATOs. In places like the Middle East and Saudi Arabia, where you've got lots of room to build and develop, that's not an issue. But if you're trying to develop it in an urban location that is space constrained, it's going to be a challenge for sure.
Yeah, you bring up so many good points here, and it's hard to figure out which one I want to latch onto. But one of the points that we've been making for a little while now is that, yeah, it's nice to get everybody excited about flying, inside of New York City, Los
Mhm.
Angeles, Dallas, Vancouver. However, we really don't see the business model just yet there.
Mhm.
We see it more happening in smaller secondary airports, even tertiary airports,
Mhm.
where you have a lot more space. And you're right. A good point that you're making, and we'll soon hopefully have someone from Electra, maybe Mark Osman from Electra, come in,
Mhm.
is to talk about so FATO, for those of you who don't know, is the approach angle, the approach funnel of an aircraft until it touches down. Mark told me once something that really, that's what changed all of our philosophy at Electric Air Mobility,
Mhm.
that their FATO was much shallower than an eVTOL. And he said, look, we don't have any transition, we just kind of glide down, that's it.
Mhm.
And I thought, wow, this completely changed the way that we viewed. And ever since, we really haven't talked about
Mhm.
vertiport as much, but more so multi-port, multiverse, whatever you want to call
Mhm.
them, it doesn't really matter. So then it opened up the whole idea that, the military have had STOL ports for 20, 30 years now, right? And within
Mhm.
that STOL ports, you actually can have helipads or vertipads now. So have you
Mhm.
guys looked at all of this? Because I know we have, and we were like, that's the only way to make some sense out of all that.
Well, we've looked at all those scenarios, and the more utility you can make out of a single location whether it's passenger, cargo, medical, finding those overlaying demands in a particular
Yep.
area. But demand is the first thing, and again, it goes back to airport planning 101. First thing you do in an airport plan or a master plan is you talk about design aircraft, but you also talk about traffic demand. And again,
Yeah.
it's a little more tricky trying to do traffic demand for a business that doesn't exist, and you can't base it on existing metrics or data. But at the end of the day, sort of a rule of thumb. If you have to drive more than 5 to 10 minutes to get to a vertiport, you've lost the game on
You've
the
lost the
passenger
game.
basis. Now, that means it needs to be in a fairly dense urban area, whether it's residential or business. And you imagine a business person living 30 or 40 or 60 minutes out of the city and has an office that they need to
Hmm.
frequent, even if it's only 3 or 4 times a week. Being able to be less than 10 minutes away from your vertiport at home and less than 5 or 10 minutes away from your business location is pretty critical. And so developing that demand, but also overlaying it on, are there other use cases that build the economics of this vertiport? Is there medevac application
Yep.
or some sort of medical services component? Is there a cargo or package delivery component? But then the other thing that you have to think about is, okay, now all these areas, you go geographically within this urban area, there's this area within a cluster, say it's a dot with a 10-minute ring around it. What happens when you then say, oh, where's the nearest high capacity power so that we can actually have recharging facilities? And suddenly you see, like, we ran into this in a previous life of mine where it was shore powered for ships.
Oh,
And
yes.
the same issue, right? And they're like, well, it'll cost, we have 4 ships coming in, 12,000 people coming off in a day, $11 million to put a
Yep.
shore power in. Well, that's fantastic. But then when we actually looked at where to pull the power from to actually to drive that, it was going to be another 25 million to get it across the bay, right?
Yes.
So
Yep.
the same thing, you have to go system wide all the way back to if it's going to be a major sort of gateway hub facility that has, say, 5 or 6 FATOs and it's going to have recharging, it needs to have access to power, the right
Yes.
quality and
Yep.
quantity of power to be able to do it. If it's just a satellite location out in the burbs, you may not even need the power, right? So there's all these layers that you need to plan
Yep.
for, and suddenly, a $500,000 satellite
Mhm.
location out in the burbs looks very different than a central location where you're talking 20, $30 million. And some of those early concepts, and people are starting to realize you need to bring the unit cost down. But if
Yep.
if you're going to spend $20 million on a gateway location in an urban area, and you start applying a per passenger charge to recover um, your capital costs, your infrastructure costs, you know, you can't start charging $40 or $50 a passenger for the infrastructure. It's not going to work.
No.
So this is where the economics are going to get really tricky, and some pretty creative planning and strategic investments going to be required. This isn't $100 million facility. It's got to be
Right.
this has got to be cheap and cheerful. It can't be opulent. Like, you see these design concepts that looks like something out of the Jetsons, and it's all very fancy, but the economics won't support a $20 million vertiport, and certainly not network wide. Maybe one central location, but all the satellite locations are going to have to be, again, very cheap and cheerful. We
It.
we learned that from float plane facilities on the west coast of Canada. Uh, if you want to see
Yeah.
what the outlying locations look like on a float plane facility, it's usually a portable building and a very Spartan piece of infrastructure. Those central locations are a little bit more developed, of course.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I look back at 10 years ago, how we looked at all of this, it was very simple. We'd fly from, building top to building top and voila, land on a parking lot somewhere and then make it to the airport, and that was it. But today, we're even looking at micro reactors, nuclear micro
Mhm.
reactors, just to get enough energy.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
also utilities are telling us, no, 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 we'll give you enough. And then when you tell them, you start to add up all the
Hmm.
numbers, they go,
Hmm.
no, reliably every day at 6 o'clock cannot do it.
Yeah.
Another point you
And
made also, yep, no, sorry.
yeah, no, I
Another
was
point,
just going to say that the vertiports are not the only thing that are competing for the
yes.
power grid. The EV vehicles and all this traditional infrastructure as well. It's it's not sort of competing in a vacuum.
No, it's not competing in a vacuum. And it's funny because there's almost like a solution for every problem that we have out there. The only problem, the underlying problem we have is now it's the financial model. And like you said,
Mhm.
if I'm out there in a suburban place, who's going to want to spend $50 million on something that does not yet make money, but
Exactly.
in 10 years will start to make money? So yeah, it adds up, it adds up, it adds up. And I mean, I think that's why we're all looking at, multi-port sort of ideas and
Mhm.
everything. How close are we from a train station, from the metro
Mhm.
station? Highways, you name. Another point that was made not too long ago, and I've liked that, and we've since started to think about that, but that's yet another expense to put it on the tab, is to get these little one-seater, two-seater aircraft closer to the vertiport. So in other words, I was talking to Matt Chasen with his Hexa, and his whole idea was, it's all fine and dandy, a four-seater, but you have to take into
Mhm.
consideration getting to the vertiport, going through the vertiport, then you fly for 10 minutes. Yeah, that's quick. And then you get off again. And then you have to go through. And then you get on your, okay, great. Now, how
Yeah.
about, and his idea is a one seater will get you much closer, point A to point B, fine. And I totally agree with that one. But then all of a sudden, on the infrastructure side of things, I started scratching my head. And, you noticed I lost a
Mhm.
lot of hair.
Yeah. Yeah.
I started thinking, okay, so now not only we have to make multi-ports with runways, with vertipads, with parking lots for EVs where the charging is multimodal charging, but now we also have to have little pads for the one-seaters, Jetsons out there that are going to come in from their
Mhm.
homes in here to get something bigger to get to no, it's really getting massively complicated, a 4D kaleidoscope kind of complication. So I'm
Well,
sort of, really, I'm left scratching my head going, what in the world is this going to look like pretty soon from now?
and it comes down again to this planning aspect of you're always looking for bottlenecks, and the bottleneck will be airspace. The bottleneck
On
will be
top of it.
parking positions. If a single
Absolutely.
passenger VTOL lands at your vertiport, you're going to want to get it out of there as quickly as possible because it's taking up very valuable real estate, but it's
Yep.
also taking up a corridor that there's
Yep.
only going to be so much capacity in those corridors, and you're going to be confined to a three-dimensional tunnel, right? And and also what they learned in Florida in early days with not just Ferrovial but others is that this isn't just going to be point to point. It's not going to be like a direct line from point A to point B. You're going to be directed around around sensitive populations and residential areas. You're going to be directed around airports. You're going to be directed around
Yep.
military airspace, and largely you're
EMS.
yeah. Now, in Florida, the reason it works pretty well in Florida is you've got three major road corridors with the three
Yep.
major highways going north-south. So if your routing is north-south, you basically end up over top of a highway somewhere, and you're going north-south between Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, wherever. And then if you're going across to the West Coast, then you're going over Everglades. Now, if you're in New York or you're in LA or you're in London or you're in Paris, that's a different story,
That's a
right?
different story.
So
Yeah.
it's not to say, it's not going to be easy. That's the point. And
Yeah.
even 3 years ago when we started this, we said if you haven't started planning your vertiport network before these aircraft are certified, which means like at that point it was now, you need to start laying down those networks and figuring it out, getting the aeronautical certifications on aircraft, airspace, airports, and flight crew. That's going to be the easy part. Like
Yep.
in the case of Vancouver, I'll give you an example. 2 million people in the metro area. It's a nice big demand, right? It's 13 different municipalities. So if you're going to lay down a
Right.
network in Greater Vancouver, you've got to negotiate with 13 different governments to be able to get permission to be able to develop land development permission and all the consultation that goes along with it. Like in Saudi Arabia, you can build whatever you want because the central government will dictate how it's going to happen, or in the
Absolutely.
UAE or wherever. In a place like Vancouver or New York or LA or Toronto, there's going to be a lot of community input. And at the end of the day, you're not going to be allowed to just build wherever you want to build. I think the local business development permits will be the far more challenging part of the regulatory regime, frankly.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I mean, my tagline is always there more solution than obstacles, but
Mm.
these obstacles are pretty good. So that's also another question we wanted to ask you is, sometimes it seems that here's the weird conundrum, right? Most of the IPs when it comes to the eVTOLs, to the electric aircraft are right here in the US, right? One thing that we've noticed is most, if not all of the infrastructure companies are outside the US. And most
Mhm.
of us almost all agree that most likely it's going to start first in the Middle East, maybe Asia. It depends
Yeah.
exactly where. Australia is a good place, also, plenty of space and all that good stuff.
Mhm.
What's your take on all of that? I'm not asking for a ball, crystal ball prediction, but to
Yeah.
me, it sounds like the Emirates and Saudi or definitely have a leg up on this.
The Middle East will be the first mover. They have a much more direct decision making process from the head of government to the actual implementation. Less complications when it comes to public consultation, and they have the greater flexibility in terms of locations. Whereas, again, the Western world is going to be much more challenging, and even Australia. There's lots of open spaces, but there's also a range issue. So, can you get
Yeah.
from Sydney? Can you get from Sydney to Melbourne? Right.
Mm,
When you're in the metropolitan area for Sydney, you'll have the same challenges you do in New York or Vancouver. Right. So
exactly. Yeah.
it's not to say that these are impossible things to overcome. The value for us as airport professionals or infrastructure professionals is we've tackled this on a much bigger basis with airports, but
True.
bigger is not less necessarily less complicated because, as I said earlier, if you want to lay down a network of 12 or 15 vertiports in a metropolitan area, and like in our case in Vancouver, if you have to negotiate the right to develop in all of these different municipalities over these different cities, you need a you need a blend of aeronautical experience and airport experience along with local government experience. And every consortium that's going to go in and try to develop a network in these various markets is going to need to make sure that they have local influence and understanding of how to deal in that local environment. And it's the same thing we learned when we were developing airports. If you're going to
Yep.
develop
Yep.
private airports in Cyprus, you need to have local shareholders that understand how to work in the political sphere of Cyprus,
Ooh,
or
yeah.
and again, in my case, Jamaica, or even Jordan. These are the three countries that I worked in abroad, where in every case there was a local component to being able to execute on the private concessions for those airports, and the same thing applies here.
Yeah, it's true. It kind of makes you wonder, we should just scrape everything and just do Hyperloop, right? You're going underground, done deal. You're traveling really fast, and that makes it even easier. Um, so one of the things that we also do on the show, and by the way, I really look forward to having you back because I need to make this parentheses right now. I have to do it. You're
Yeah, we're
one of the
just we're
rare people.
scratching the surface, right?
Oh yeah, we're just scratching the surface. There's so much more under the surface. But actually, it's a good segue where you just said you're one of those few people in the industry, and there are about five of you guys I really like because you're straight talker. You talk exactly how you see it, and a lot of people love to embellish it, sugarcoat it, and even me to a certain point before I was a little bit more optimistic and enthusiastic, but now these days I'm way more realistic. So I've really enjoyed that a lot about you and a few of our friends out there. Tell us a little bit about what motivates you to do all of this work in here because it almost seems like mission impossible at times. But what gets you out of bed in the morning?
Well, it's the innovation, and it's the possibility for the future. But if you don't know what the challenges are ahead of you, you can never tackle them, or you'll just blindly be walking down the road and you're gonna run into a tree. Like it's literally. And so for us, we see it's a nascent industry that has a lot of really bright people working on aircraft solutions and air traffic management solutions, which is great. But knowing what we know, what gets me out of bed in the morning is knowing that our experience and skill set has a value to the solution. And frankly, I'm not sure. Every year when I go to these various conferences, I start to see people's eyes opening up a little bit more on the infrastructure side.
So
But
true.
5 years ago or 4 years ago when they were first talking about this, it was like, well, this infrastructure is just going to happen. Well, it's not just going to happen. And the opportunity and the enthusiasm I have is I like to figure out problems, figure out solutions, figure out the puzzle. And this will be a puzzle, right? It'll be a three
Yeah, I
dimensional.
think
It'll be a three-dimensional one.
yeah, it is definitely, and I think you said it really well. It's funny because I think you and I probably agree on the fact that it will happen one day or the other,
Mm,
right? I mean, whether it takes 5 or 75 years, it will happen. And so we're at that juicy point in
mm,
history, and
mm.
it's true, it's a once in a lifetime revolution, blah blah blah. But we're here to figure it out, and there's no book. We can't go by any book. We're writing it down. There are some things that we can bring along into this new world of ours, but we're just building it from scratch, and it's
Well,
fascinating. You're right. Every
and
year there's a
you
new
have to take
piece.
baby steps, right?
Yes.
There was great ambitions that we'd have the first operational network by 2024 or 2025. I knew it was going to take longer than that.
No.
But what the
Yeah.
really exciting part of this is, and maybe this is a topic for the next session, but the autonomy. Like right now, it's impossible
Oh,
to think about autonomous flying aircraft for
right.
this purpose.
Yep.
But what's going to build that for us is passenger vehicles and transport vehicles. They're already testing in Texas autonomous trucks,
Yeah.
transport trucks that they will sort of open up that space, and then it will start seeing more of an application in passenger vehicles. And then when that is all tested in 2 dimensions, and the maturity of the vertiports and the advanced air mobility is to a point where the concept has been proven and has been
Right.
proven safe, it can then be possible to see autonomy in aircraft. But you've got to go step
Right.
by step. And again, you
That's,
know, something I watched recently on transport vehicles, they said, well, there will be accidents. Yes, there will be.
oh, yes.
But
Of
the
course.
developer of the technology said, yes, but the the fatality rate of of an automated vehicle will be less than that of those driven by people. But it will be hard to get it past that sort of concept that, well, this
Yes.
is still safer even though it's not perfect, because we expect the machines to be perfect. We don't expect the people to be perfect. And
And
I don't want to get into
it's true.
the pilot error side of things, but there's been some pretty horrific accidents in the last 60 days,
Hmm.
in the US and elsewhere, largely due to human error. Now,
Human error.
will a machine be perfect? Absolutely not. The question is, can it be safer, and can people feel comfortable that their chances of being in a terrible accident are much lower with an autonomous vehicle, whether it's on the ground or flying in 3 dimensions? That's the question. So,
No, I think you're totally right. Absolutely. And
yeah.
that's why I always give credence to a company like Whisk to say, hey, we're going to avoid the hoopla. We're going to just go for
Mhm.
autonomous, and that's perfect and everything.
Yeah.
One thing that we need to be really worried about is media, the entertainment media world. Because you just reminded me of an interesting statistics. In the US, 500,000 cars go up in smoke every year. One EV goes up in smoke and it
Yeah,
makes national headlines. Hello.
absolutely.
140,000 gasoline stations go up in smoke every year. Have you
Yep.
ever heard that? Have you ever seen
No,
that in the news? Local
no,
news, maybe. Mm.
no.
So we have that to work on top of, and it's hard. It's really challenging. I sat with at press releases with anchor people and big journalists, and I was just, what are
Well,
they
10
asking?
minute 10-minute walk from my house last week, a Volkswagen van went up in flames. Gasoline didn't make the news. Had that been an EV,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
it would have been on
It would have
the
been the
6 o'clock
news.
news.
Yes.
So
Yep. Yep.
so there's the reality of salacious news, and that's what sells. But you know, I think
At what
rushing
price?
into trying to get into the mainstream is not going to be successful. It's positive, plausible, and productive steps
Yes.
forward,
Yes.
and not rushing things. Right?
And it's like every disruptive technologies that we've seen in the past 40 years or so
Mhm.
is, first of all, it was military, then it was VVIP, then it was VIP, then it was tourism business, and blah, blah, blah. And then it trickles down. So we know it's going to go more or less in that direction.
You don't have to look any further than GPS, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
GPS, that's a good point. Yeah, military first, yada, yada, yada. And now we get to pay for the thing that we forget. I'm not going to go down that road, right? So tell us a little bit more about where can people find out more about what you guys do, and after that, we'll say I look forward to having you again and again and again on the
Absolutely.
show.
Well, best place to find us is online at www.modalis, modalis.ca. Proudly Canadian. Thank you very much. And yeah, you'll see our five business lines that are everything from the business side of airports to operations to business intelligence and the human resource side of it, but also the customer experience. And they all tie together. So take a look and reach out to us if there's things that have you questioning how we make this all happen. Happy to have a chat.
Thank you. Thank you, Curtis. I really enjoyed this, and I look forward to our next discussions, and I look forward to bumping into you on our next event, wherever it is. I have to say this year, a little bit less.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care, and it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Curtis. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.